Welcome to this explainer. All right, I want you to picture this. It's August 1947. We're inside Viceroy House in New Delhi, and the clock has just struck midnight. There's this heavy, strange silence in the air, the kind of breathless quiet right before a massive storm breaks. And inside the high walls of this estate, Lord Mountbatten is sitting at his desk just staring intently at a map. On this map, a fresh line has just been drawn. It's a line that's literally going to change the lives of millions of people who are fast asleep right at that moment, completely unaware that the ground beneath them has just shifted forever. Today, we're diving into a historical documentary of an unprecedented human tragedy, the partition of India and Pakistan.
Okay, let's really dive into this. That line Mountbatten was looking at, it was just a few inches of ink on a piece of paper. But on the Earth itself, it became a massive, bleeding wound stretching thousands of miles. This was a cut right through millions of homes, severing a completely intermingled population. Now, the history books call it a partition, but for the people actually living through it, it was this sudden, violent severing of their very roots. So to really understand the sheer magnitude of this trauma, and why a simple line drawn in a quiet office caused so much bloodshed, we need to step back. We need to look at the corridors of power where this destiny was written.
Part 1. The Seeds of Division.
You see, long before that ink ever hit the map, the groundwork for this division was laid out rapidly over just a few years. British India was still under colonial rule, sure, but the end was absolutely inevitable. And the real tragedy here is that the future of the entire subcontinent was being played like a giant game of chess by a few powerful figures, while the devastating price was paid entirely by the common people. It really crystallized in March 1940 with the Lahore Resolution. That's when Muhammad Ali Jinnah stood up and articulated his two-nation theory. He argued that Hindus and Muslims were two completely distinct nations, separate cultures, and therefore they needed two completely separate countries. Now, Mahatma Gandhi deeply opposed this. He believed division was a huge mistake that would end up written in blood. But as tensions kept boiling over, leaders like Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel took a more, let's say, pragmatic stance. He reluctantly accepted that a smaller loss, meaning division, might just be the only way to stop the larger loss of a total uncontrollable civil war.
And that fear of a massive civil war, it wasn't just theoretical. It got terrifyingly real on August 16, 1946, what's known as Direct Action Day. The streets of Kolkata descended into absolute chaos. Over 4 horrific days, more than 5,000 people were killed. Shops were burned to the ground. Homes were destroyed. The whole city was paralyzed. For the British government watching from London, who remember were exhausted, virtually bankrupt, and completely depleted from World War II, this violence was a glaring, stark warning. They realized they just didn't have the strength or the willpower to maintain control anymore. A massive civil war was right at their doorstep.
Part 2. Drawing the Radcliffe Line.
Sensing this extreme urgency and the impending loss of control, British Prime Minister Clement Attlee sends Lord Mountbatten to India to oversee their exit. Mountbatten takes one look at this incredibly volatile situation and makes a highly controversial, incredibly fateful decision. He bumps up the departure date. Instead of leaving in June 1948 like they originally planned, he pushes the deadline all the way up to August 1947. He essentially decides to carve up a massive subcontinent in a matter of months. And this brings us to one of the most tragic ironies of this whole explainer. 5 weeks. That is the exact amount of time given to Sir Cyril Radcliffe to draw these borders. Get this, Radcliffe was a British lawyer who had never even been to India. He knew absolutely nothing about the soil of Punjab or the rivers of Bengal. Yet he's handed some demographic statistics and old maps, and he's told to draw a border straight through provinces where Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs lived completely intertwined, literally right next door to each other. It was, quite frankly, a mathematically impossible puzzle to solve without causing absolute devastation.
So, after just 5 weeks of working secluded with his maps, the Radcliffe Line is finalized. Radcliffe himself actually recognized the utter horror of what he was forced to engineer. He later said he was glad to leave India and never return. He even refused his handsome fee for the job. Maybe, just maybe, he realized that the impossible puzzle he had solved on paper was about to unleash a human tragedy so massive that no amount of money could ever compensate for it.
Part 3. The Human Tragedy.
Now, what's really interesting about the slide is the sheer contrast it highlights. On the 14th and 15th of August 1947, the new nations of Pakistan and India are officially born. In Karachi, Jinnah takes his oath. In Delhi, Jawaharlal Nehru delivers his famous Tryst with Destiny speech. The capital cities are lighting up with celebrations. But at the exact same time, far away from the podiums and the microphones, a very dark, bloody reality is unfolding on the ground in Punjab and Bengal. The political celebration stood in this jarring, almost unbelievable contrast to the immediate suffering of the people. Look at the symmetrical tragedy of the everyday person here. In Punjab, a place where people had literally shared food for centuries, neighbors suddenly became enemies. Take Ram Lal, a Hindu farmer in Lyalpur, and his childhood friend Kareem, a Muslim. These were families who celebrated festivals together. But overnight, this newly drawn line meant Ram Lal was forced to abandon his ancestral land for India, while Kareem had to flee his home for Pakistan. Everyday friends thrust instantly into the largest human migration in recorded history.
I really want to pause here for a second to just let these statistics sink in. We are talking about 14 million people completely displaced. 14 million! That's entire cities' worth of people walking in massive convoys or packed into overflowing trains. Somewhere between 200,000 and 1 million people lost their lives in the violence that followed. There were literal ghost trains that would leave full of hopeful refugees and arrive at their destinations filled only with bodies. And tragically, between 75,000 and 100,000 women were abducted and subjected to unspeakable atrocities. Huge, sprawling, destitute refugee camps popped up in Delhi, Lahore, and Dhaka, taking in millions who showed up with nothing but maybe a broken suitcase and profoundly traumatized memories. These aren't just numbers on a screen. Every single digit here represents a totally shattered human universe.
Part 4. The Unresolved Conflicts.
Even as that immediate massive migration started to wind down, the deep wounds of partition were already festering into new, totally unresolved conflicts. The most profound personal casualty of this era was Mahatma Gandhi himself. While the new countries were busy celebrating independence, Gandhi was actually in Kolkata, deeply grieving and fasting to try and put a stop to the riots. And while his fast did work to some extent, on January 30, 1948, the man who had championed Hindu-Muslim unity his entire life was assassinated by Nathuram Godse. With Gandhi's death, that vision of an undivided, peaceful coexistence really seemed to die with him. And then, of course, there was Kashmir. This is the wound that remains completely green today. During partition, princely states had to choose between joining India or Pakistan, while the Hindu Maharaja of Muslim-majority Kashmir, Hari Singh, hesitated. This hesitation led to an invasion by tribal fighters from Pakistan. Panicking, the Maharaja asked India for military aid, signing an instrument of accession. Indian troops arrived and pushed back the fighters, but then a major ideological split happened. Prime Minister Nehru sought United Nations intervention, while Sardar Patel wanted a purely military solution to reclaim the entire territory. The end result? A UN ceasefire and the creation of the line of control, which basically froze the conflict right in place.
Meanwhile, over on the other side of the subcontinent, Bengal was facing its own agonizing division. Now, historians do note that it was slightly less bloody than the absolute carnage we saw in Punjab, but it was honestly just as heartbreaking. A deeply unified cultural and linguistic identity was torn right down the middle. West Bengal stayed with India, while East Bengal became part of Pakistan. And as we know, they would later fight their own devastating war in 1971 to eventually become Bangladesh. Basically, a singular Bengali people who were so incredibly proud of their shared language were now abruptly divided by a political border.
Part 5. The Long-Term Consequences. So the crucial point is this. Mountbatten's wildly rushed timeline directly resulted in an administrative catastrophe, leaving a legacy of conflict that persists over 75 years later.
By compressing that handover from 10 months down to just 10 weeks, the military and police forces were left hopelessly unprepared to protect the migrating masses. But the legacy of that incredible rush goes far, far beyond the summer of 1947. It cemented this profound geopolitical friction that has completely defined South Asia. Today, we're looking at a stark, almost unbelievable juxtaposition. On one hand, you have the geopolitical reality. India and Pakistan are two heavily armed nuclear powers. They fought 3 major wars. They maintained closed borders, direct trains and buses are halted, and getting a visa is incredibly strict, almost impossible. Yet, on the other hand, look at the cultural reality. The descendants of folks like Ram Lal and Kareem still share the exact same roots, the same language, the same food, the same music, and a really profound shared ancestral pain. It's pretty wild to think that the grandfathers of today's citizens literally drank from the same wells and slept under the exact same sky.
As objective observers looking back through this historical documentary, we're really left to ponder the same debates that historians are still arguing over today. Was this incredibly rushed, bloody partition truly the only way out?
And more importantly, looking forward, can the deep, deep wounds of 1947 ever truly heal? Because as the stories of those millions of refugees tell us, some lines aren't just drawn on a piece of paper. They seep deep into the bones, and that pain gets passed down quietly from generation to generation. It is, without a doubt, a history we absolutely cannot afford to forget.